Okay. Little energetic music. Can everybody hear me? Thumbs up if you can hear me.
Yeah, you can see it.
Okay, good. What I'd like you to do is if you see your chat box, just let me know what city and state you're coming from and how did you hear about our program. It would just be great to hear that from you, okay? So I want to also tell you today, we will have our save your questions at the end. You could write them to me in the chat and we'll hopefully get to everything. We will be ending at 1 o'clock. I know everybody's very busy, but we have a lot to share with you. I want to introduce myself. I am Susan Lusk, co-director of the Parkinson's Wellness Project. We are a young organization which wants to share education, exercise, awareness, connection, and courage for people with Parkinson's and their families and friends. Hold on a second. Okay. So it's good to hear all the technical difficulties. You see what we're going through. It's stress and managing stress in the moment and being in the present moment. So I want to introduce myself to you. I am Susan Lust, co-director of the Parkinson's Wellness Project. As I said, that we are here to bring you education, and we have a whole exercise program. We bring great speakers to you, as you'll see today. We want to connect with you, and we want to give everybody courage. So mostly, I always appreciate how I get to everybody, how I get to know everybody. And a lot of times I meet people through you, and a lot of times I meet people through our sponsors. And today, our two terrific sponsors are Kaiwo Kirin and Abbott. And they are wonderful for me to talk to brainstorm with, to come up with ideas, and they're a very good sounding board for me. So I want to thank both Kaiwo Kirin and Abbott today. But I want to thank everybody for joining us for lunch today. I know some of you got together with friends and are actually having lunch. This is our PWP MD lunch with our doctor. We have 3 programs. Today is the first one of 2022. And today we have 2 very stimulating speakers, Dr. Elana Clar and physical therapist Jennifer Reid. After completing her residency at Georgetown University, she completed a 2-year movement disorders fellowship at Mount Sinai at Beth Israel Medical Center. And she obtained subspecialty training in deep brain stimulation, but she treats all types of movement disorders, including Parkinson's. Dr. Clar is dedicated to serving as an advocate. We know that we met her while she was working on a project for Ping Pong Parkinson's, actually. Does everybody want to mute themselves right now? That would be a big help.
Doesn't matter.
Dr. Clar has participated in groundbreaking research for the treatment of Parkinson's disease, and she is also a firm believer in integrative medicine and the complementary role exercise, nutrition, and alternative therapies play in helping patients maximize their quality of life. But before we hear from Dr. Clar, and she has time to get here, I would like to introduce you to our first speaker. Just want to make sure everybody's muted. Do you know how to do that?
No. Mute.
Maurice, maybe you can mute everybody. Okay. Yeah, that's better. Okay, very good. Okay, so Jennifer Reid, I'm so happy to have met her. Jennifer Reid has just become a new friend. We met her right after the Tulip Fest. Somebody had introduced her to us, and we're so lucky that she moved to Rockland. She has over 10 years of experience as a physical therapist, providing care for persons with neurologic and movement disorders. She's the owner of Ebb and Flow Physical Therapy that serves New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Jennifer received her Doctor of Physical Therapy degree from Rutgers, and then she's also a board certified neurologic specialist. And that's why it's so great to have met Jennifer because she has a specialty. She's just not like any physical therapist. She really specializes in Parkinson's, and she's taken the LSVT big and the power moves. Her academic endeavors also, I'm very impressed with what she's doing at Columbia. She is a lab assistant and a guest lecturer at Columbia University's Doctor of Physical Therapy program, and she participates in the research that explores the role of coaching and exercise in persons with PD through the Neuro Rehab Research Lab at Columbia. So today's topic, I know we can all relate to this, is pain on PD, and I'd like to welcome Jennifer. Jennifer, you're muted, so let's unmute you.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Just wave or give me a high five, thumbs up. Okay. So Susan, just so you know, the screen sharing is disabled, but that's fine. I'm just going to talk as long as everybody's okay looking at me and not necessarily my screen.
Maurice can screen share if you need it. So
Okay. Let's see if it's okay. Here we go. All right. And everybody can see? Yeah. All right. We're good, Susan?
yes, very good.
Perfect. Okay.
Beautiful. I like that blue.
Thank you. All right. So again, I am Jennifer Reid. I am owner of Ebb and Flow Physical Therapy. I am also co-owner of Inspired PD, which is a physical activity coaching program that I share with Geraldine Yu, who is a coworker of mine when I was employed at New York Presbyterian Hospital. I wanted to say, first off, thank you, Susan, for having me here today. It is a pleasure and an honor to have met you and to also be able to be a part of the programming with Parkinson's Wellness Project. So thank you so very much. And thank you, everybody, for your time. I'm here to chat very briefly about the role of pain and Parkinson's disease. As a physical therapist specializing in the care of people with Parkinson's disease, I often find myself fielding a myriad of questions as I help my clients navigate this weaving, winding road that is Parkinson's. And I would have to say that questions about pain are some of the ones I field most frequently. So I'm going to be talking just a little bit about this today. All right. Pain is often very difficult to quantify and describe because it is something that the individual experiences. It's very subjective. And as opposed to some of the more traditional symptoms that we can see or you can visibly see yourself or feel yourself, like the tremors, the tightness associated with rigidity, the slowness of movement or bradykinesia, as we refer to it as, or difficulties with balance and instability. It is the non-motor symptoms that often occur far before the motor symptoms occur. And we can often chalk these up to lots of different reasons: fatigue, pain, loss of smell, changes in perhaps your bowel and bladder regimen. These are all things that, in and of itself, you might say, oh, one, I'm getting older, or two, yeah, I have these aches and pains, and I've kind of always had aches and pains. But they're often, because they can be a little bit more vague and unclear, they cause a lot of frustration and oftentimes can contribute to a decline in just overall quality of life for the individual that's experiencing them. And while many of these symptoms are emotional in nature, like anxiety or depression or just sort of a general apathy and fatigue, many of these are physiological, such as pain. And that's what we're going to be talking a little bit today. Okay. So there are 5 types of pain that often are discussed when we're talking about somebody that has a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. And it is important to determine what type of pain you are experiencing, because the treatment can be very different. When we speak about musculoskeletal pain, this is often a result of maybe some tightness, lack of flexibility in the setting of perhaps some postural changes, or the rigidity, that tightness that you may feel as you try to move throughout your day. It can be present as cramping, or a feeling of like a Charlie horse, a lot of times people will describe. And these pains can come and go, but it is probably one of the more frequent types of pain that my clients experience. Then there's radicular pain, and this is typically associated with a burning, tightness, tingling, numbness, that people would say, I feel this in my hands or my feet, down the back of my leg. And this is often due to an irritation of the nerves. And this can be brought on by some of the symptoms of Parkinson's. Then there's dystonic pain. So in this instance, these are involuntary muscle contractions that are occurring. Some people will describe a curling of the toes or fingers. You'll feel like when you're walking, maybe your toes curl, you can't can't flatten your foot. Perhaps your foot turns inwards. Again, your hands may curl as you go to do something. It's a different sort of scenario than more traditional musculoskeletal pain. Then there's what we call central or neuropathic pain. And this is sort of a deep, more vague, aching sort of pain that just sort of lingers. And it's hard to describe, but it often can be a little unrelenting. People may feel this all the time. And that's another form of pain that people with Parkinson's disease will often describe. And then there's sort of the umbrella other, that some forms of pain that will fall into that category are orofacial pain. So a lot of times people will get tightness in their neck or their jaw if they're having some clenching or maybe rigidity of those muscles in and around their jaw and their mouth. In addition to restless leg syndrome. So these sort of constant movements that are happening, you feel like you have to move, and over time you get a little uncomfortable. These are just some of the examples of other types of pain that fall into this category. And what's important to know is that while musculoskeletal pain is the most frequently observed type of pain, the central pain is oftentimes the most severe in intensity. So it's really important when you are working with either your doctor or another clinician, whether it be a physical therapist, occupational therapist, the time should be spent, if you're experiencing pain, to really discern what pain is occurring so that the best mode of treatment can be presented to you. Okay. So you may often wonder, how do I know if the pain that I feel is due to Parkinson's disease, or is it something else? Is it just arthritis? Is it this is typical ache and pain that I should expect because I'm getting older? Or was this from the exercise that I did tonight? Did I do too much? And again, questions that I field on a regular basis from my clients. It can sometimes be a little difficult to determine what came first, the pain or the Parkinson's. But in this case, it's more important to, like we talked about, determine what kind of pain you're experiencing, and figure out how to address it. So a few questions I often will tell my clients to ask themselves is, one, the pain you're experiencing, did it begin after a recent change in your activity level? Were you out and about, maybe helping a family member move things this weekend, or perhaps you typically go for a mile walk and yesterday you did 3 because you were feeling good? Can you correlate your pain experience back to something that is different in your daily activity? Because that can just be, okay, maybe I jumped too far, I did too much. And you can bring that back to, okay, that's a normal pain response. That's a normal experience that you would have whether you have a diagnosis of Parkinson's or not. Do you have, maybe you started a new exercise program or you took a new class with PWP and you find that you're really sore next 24 to 48 hours, even the 72 hours after maybe you participated in that exercise program. That's also a normal pain experience. It's referred to as delayed onset muscle soreness, and it's an expected part of exercise, and that shouldn't be any cause of concern unless it lingers beyond that 72-hour period. And the other question is, if you are a person that is taking carbidopa or levodopa to manage some of the symptoms of your Parkinson's disease, do you find that the pain is typically occurring closer to your off period or during your off period, and then it sort of goes away as you enter your on period? That can be very telling that, okay, this pain may be related to Parkinson's. And these are just some of the questions that I field and sort of ask my clients, so we can sort of work through that together, and you can get the relief that, okay, normal, okay, Parkinson's. Excuse me. It's important to address pain because the research states anywhere from 30 to 85% of people who have a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease experience pain at some point in the course of their care. Oftentimes, the higher numbers, that closer to that 80-85%, is later in the stages of Parkinson's disease. But it is predictive of your quality of life. So managing one's pain is incredibly valuable and important in the management of your care. So what are some of the treatment options? So many times it's a matter of medication, which would come from your neurologist or a movement disorder specialist would have a conversation with you and determine what is the best route to manage these symptoms, perhaps via medication. I am not a doctor or a medical doctor. I'm a doctor of physical therapy. And for me, I'm proud to say that I offer the one medication that has no side effects, which is exercise. Exercise is medicine. It is perhaps one of the most important medications you will take, quote unquote, as somebody that is living with Parkinson's disease, because it has such a profound effect on movement. It improves your ability to move. Pain, most people find that as they move more, their pain decreases, regardless of type, with the exception of maybe some of the more like chronic pain. The central pain. But even then, just the overall ability to move and get out and stretch your limbs and get your blood pumping are not only neuroprotective, which is good for your brain, but as we talked about, is going to improve and decrease your pain. Motion is lotion. So,
Thank you, Jennifer. We are so anxious to start working with you. You don't know, really. Really, Jennifer's going to be working with us in our workout program, and hopefully starting in a month or two. And she'll be doing assessments of everybody twice a year, which will really help focus us. And we're looking forward to working together with you. So thank you very much.
yeah, no
Save your
worries.
questions. Save your questions for Jennifer at the end. And now I am honored to have Dr. Clar, who is here to speak to us about a subject we're all very curious about. I think it's a topic that we understand from our early days but today using marijuana as a therapeutic is quite different. And we're honored to have Dr. Clar, a doctor who views her relationship with her patients as a partnership and is dedicated to spreading awareness about Parkinson's. So thank you for being with us, Dr. Clar.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to, before I set up the screen share, I just want to mention a couple of points in support of what Jen was previously stating. There are certainly a lot of different types of pain that accompany Parkinson's. I know that Susan already gave the introductions, but I'm a movement disorders specialist, movement disorder neurologist, and even within that specialty, I'm subspecialized as a DBS neurologist. So a lot of the work that I do is actually surgical in evaluating patients who need or may want surgery. But today we are talking about pain, and I will be discussing about cannabis and marijuana and the role it plays. But again, going back to Jen's point about pain and different forms of pain in Parkinson's, it is important to discern the different kinds, and it can't be overstated how critical movement and exercise is, because Parkinson's is a condition that's trying to slow you down and stiffen you up. And the antithesis to that is exercise. So I always tell my patients, exercise is as important, if not more important. It does half the job. So, we can prescribe medications until the sky falls, but it's only going to take you halfway there. The other half is everybody doing their own homework and figuring out how to be consistent with incorporating some form of a cardiovascular strength training, stretching routine in their day-to-day activities. So what I'm going to do now is actually close my video, because I want everybody just to focus on the slides. So I'm going to now share my screen. Oh, hold on. That didn't work out. Nope.
While you're sharing, I'll just say, Dr. Clar, that we have a couple of disciplined workout buddies on the screen right now. They're working out. They're just not sitting here listening. They're working out.
Oh
as they're
yes,
listening.
Betty. I actually know Betty.
Yes, I know. That's how I got to you.
Yes. All right. Does everybody see my screen?
Yes, we see your screen.
Okay, perfect. All right. Let's do this. Okay. So I thought it would be interesting to start 2022 with a webinar on cannabis, because it was just last year that both New York and New Jersey legalized recreational marijuana. And this has not translated to an open market yet, since regulations are still being sorted out, but that will likely change in the coming year. And as things become more mainstream, it is only appropriate to ask what role, if any, it could have in the management of symptoms for neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's. Before we dive into the details, however, I would like to mention that recreational marijuana is not the same as medical marijuana, and I will explain why later. But I am not a licensed medical marijuana prescriber. Covered indications for medical marijuana differ state to state. But to find a directory of licensed prescribers, all you have to do is visit the New Jersey or New York Department of Health website, and the links are on this slide. Because the overlapping terminology in the cannabis industry can be somewhat confusing, one of my goals today is to clarify the language used to describe the drug. I think it is also helpful to review the history and economy of medical cannabis before delving into the bench research and clinical studies that have looked at its potential impact on Parkinson's disease. So what exactly is cannabis? Cannabis is a flowering plant, and there are three documented types: sativa, indica, and ruderalis. Ruderalis is native to Eastern Europe and Russia, and it's the least potent of the three types. While it's been used in Russian and Mongolian folk medicine to treat depression, it is not cultivated for recreational or medicinal purposes in the US. The two main plant types that are farmed around the world are sativa and indica, and many farmers cultivate hybrid plants that are a mix of the two. Sativa is the cannabis type that is associated with improved alertness, energy, creativity, and euphoria. and it's the preferred daytime drug, while indica is the cannabis type associated with body relaxation, pain and nausea relief, appetite stimulation, and it is helpful as a sleep aid. There are over 1,200 chemical compounds in or on cannabis, broken down by various categories. Phytocannabinoids are pharmacologically active compounds that are isolated from cannabis, and that's where marijuana is derived from. Terpenes or terpenoids give cannabis different aromatic or scent attributes and have anti-inflammatory properties, while the flavonoids are a different group of chemical compounds known to be strong antioxidants. Cannabis also has lipids, omega fatty acids, chlorophyll, and various other classes of chemical compounds. Again, because marijuana is derived from phytocannabinoids, that is the category of chemical compound we will focus on. So in cannabis, it is the flowers, leaves, and the resin seeds, also known as trichomes, that contain most of the cannabinoids or phytocannabinoids. THC is the most abundant cannabinoid and the primary psychoactive compound in cannabis. This is the ingredient that gives people a high. It also is the ingredient that puts people at risk for developing hallucinations, but it's also the ingredient that has healing properties. CBD or cannabidiol is the second most abundant cannabinoid and is not psychoactive, but is considered to be the primary compound that gives cannabis its reputation as a therapeutic supplement for many medical conditions. The important thing to understand about cannabis isn't so much the distinction between the sativa or indica plants, but the fact that all the various iterations of cannabis drugs come down to its chemical composition. At the end of the day, it is the ratio of CBD to THC or THC to CBD that differentiates the products that are manufactured from the cannabis plant. So before I go to the next slide, I have to just repeat all these big C words one more time, because it's like saying supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, and it's very easy to confuse. So phytocannabinoids, again, it's a category of chemical compound in the cannabis plant. And phytocannabinoids is synonymous with cannabinoids, and CBD is an acronym that stands for cannabidiol. Okay, you got it? Good. All right, so when we're talking about terminology, marijuana and hemp both come from the cannabis plant. So marijuana can be derived from either the sativa or indica plants, while hemp is derived solely from a variant of the sativa plant. All hemp products are legal because their THC content is less than 0.3%. This is a federal regulation. And as a general matter, their CBD content rarely exceeds 5%, but some products have CBD levels as high as 10%. Hemp is usually found in the stalk of the sativa plant, and before its medicinal properties were discovered, hemp fibers were used to make rope, fabric, paper, and oil, and they're still done so today. So you can go online and Google best hemp for whatever reason, and you'll be able to just purchase it directly online, okay? In contrast to hemp, marijuana is a different category because the THC content can be anywhere from 5 to 35% of the product. And remember, THC is the chemical compound that is psychoactive, right? So marijuana's THC content can be anywhere from 5 to 35% of a product, while the CBD level ranges from 5 to 10%. And recreational marijuana tends to have a higher THC content than medical marijuana, while medical marijuana has a much higher ratio of CBD for its therapeutic properties. But that is not the only difference between the two. Recreational marijuana products are not subject to the same scrutiny and testing processes as medical marijuana. And in order for a medical cannabis product to be sold in a licensed dispensary, it has to be extensively tested and verified as a high quality product. Advertised potency levels of THC and CBD and the product composition may be more accurate on medical cannabis packaging. And if you don't have the same oversight as medical marijuana, well, recreational marijuana inevitably will carry a higher risk for carrying unwanted fungal or plant bacteria in the product, or worse, toxic chemicals. And this has actually been supported by a number of studies. In 2016, there was a sampling of recreational cannabis products legally purchased at stores in Washington state. And they found that of the 26 samples, 22 of them, or 85%, had pesticide residue detected. In 2018, there was a study out of Netherlands that analyzed 46 random commercial marijuana products, and only 45% provided label information regarding the CBD THC content, many of which didn't even match what was actually found in the product. And 7 out of 46, or 15%, of the samples contained no CBD or THC content whatsoever. And then they also found that there was a lot of cannabinoid byproduct in the samples. So this basically proved that there was a very poor isolation technique involving in isolating the specific chemical compounds. So, again, giving these generalizations, it's important to recognize there's a difference between recreational and medical marijuana, but to state that all medical marijuana is higher quality than all recreational marijuana would be incorrect. As a result of legalization sweeping our country and rising competition, the recreational industry is having to step up their product quality and their potency standards. So it's becoming a little more difficult actually to discern quality differences between the two, because everybody has their eyes on this now. Of course, medical marijuana, as we know it today, didn't always have such stringent oversight and regulations, and that's because cannabis is old, very, very old, in fact. According to a genomic analysis of 110 plants around the world, cannabis was domesticated in Northwest China some 12,000 years ago. And as such, its cultivation and use in medicine likely predates the written word. The oldest written record of cannabis is in an emperor's Chinese pharmacopoeia dating back to 2737 BC, where it was used to treat hundreds of different ailments. It was also heavily documented in religious Hindu texts until 1000 BC, with legend holding that the deity Shiva was given the title Lord of Bang, because bang, which is an edible mixture of leaves and flowers from the cannabis plant, was one of his favorite foods. Galen, who was a famous Greek physician and philosopher in the Roman Empire, was known to use cannabis for its therapeutic properties and mood enhancement. In the Middle Ages, William Turner was the first English botanist who wrote a book about various natural herbs and documented how essential hemp was to any herbalist's medicine cabinet. The first documented cultivation of cannabis in North America was recorded in 1611 when English settlers grew the crop commercially in Jamestown, Virginia. It's known that George Washington cultivated cannabis on his plantation in Mount Vernon. Thomas Jefferson also grew hemp in Monticello, and both of them were noting uses of the plant in their diaries. During the Napoleonic conquests, Napoleon brought cannabis back to France from Egypt, and it was investigated in France for its pain relieving and sedative qualities. Its use in medicine was also documented by prominent doctors like William Osler, who's considered the father of modern medicine, and Sir William O'Shaughnessy, who conducted the first human clinical trials in 1839, where he was establishing the benefits of cannabis for cholera, my mom always says cholera, but cholera and rheumatism and reduction in seizures. Now, cannabis was listed on the US Pharmacopoeia for an entire century, from 1842 to 1942. And in the 1800s, cannabis-derived medications were the first, second, and third most commonly prescribed medications in the United States. By the early 1900s, cannabis was at the height of popularity. The US was completely self-sufficient in farming and cultivating its own cannabis, so much so that during World War I, it didn't have to rely on importing any supply from India, even when foreign supply chains were disrupted. But things took a turn in the 1930s. So there was a guy, his name was Henry Anslinger. He was a government official who was appointed the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. And he ultimately became the architect of national prohibition. He really believed that cannabis caused insanity and pushed people toward criminal acts. And he was working in conjunction with industrialists like William Hearst and Lamo DuPont to get cannabis nationally banned. Hearst and DuPont were keenly interested in the ban for their own self-interests because they stood to benefit financially. So Hearst wanted cannabis banned because hemp production posed direct competition to his lumber business that he used for his media empire, and DuPont was a businessman who sought to promote his own chemical and pharmaceutical agents. In 1936, there was a film called Reefer Madness. Its original title was actually Tell Your Children. This film was financed by a small church group, and the intention of the film was to scare the daylights out of every parent who saw it. It was a morality tale about how cannabis addiction ruined the life of its young protagonist and got a lot of people killed or sexually compromised or committed to lunatic asylums. So very convincing. And between the film and newspapers reporting that the drug was constantly being connected to violent crime and efforts that were made by Anslinger and his industrialist friends, public opinion started to sway. And this all culminated in the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which effectively ended the use of cannabis products. Cannabis was not prohibited outright, but the high taxation on growers and sellers and buyers ultimately had the same effect. In 1970, Congress passed the Controlled Substances Act, creating 5 categories or schedules to classify substances based on medical use or lack thereof and potential for dependency or abuse. Marijuana was placed in Schedule 1, which is the class of drugs identified as having a high potential for abuse, no accepted medical use, and unproven safety of use under medical supervision. And to date, the CSA has not changed. It provides that the use, sale, and possession of cannabis in any form in the United States is still federally illegal. That's very important to recognize. And federal law supersedes state law. That means cannabis is still a federal crime, even in states that have legalized medical or recreational marijuana. But federal agencies, of course, are not prioritizing any enforcement of this unless the drugs are associated with larger organized crime, gang activity, or impaired driving. While prescriptions can be written for drugs that are in Schedule 2, 3, 4, and 5 categories, prescriptions cannot be written for Schedule 1 class drugs, and that includes medical marijuana. The loophole is that properly licensed doctors are able to recommend or certify patients under protection by the First Amendment, certify patients who need medical marijuana if they have qualifying conditions in states where medical marijuana is legal. And as I mentioned in the beginning, qualifying conditions can vary state to state. So for example, Parkinson's is not a covered indication in New Jersey, but it is a covered indication in New York. So if you live in New Jersey, but you see your doctor in New York City, you cannot obtain a medical marijuana card from your New York doctor for Parkinson's if you are a New Jersey resident with a New Jersey address. And the converse is true. Although I don't know too many Manhattanites that come to New Jersey for their doctor, but things are possible. Now, just as a point of reference, marijuana keeps some interesting company in its class of Schedule 1 drugs. So this includes heroin, LSD, ecstasy, and quaaludes, among others. And while Schedule 2 class drugs still have a high potential for abuse and dependency, the difference is that there is recognized and accepted medical use. So this includes narcotics like Percocet, morphine, Dilaudid, or stimulants like Ritalin or Adderall.
Dr. Clar, can I just interrupt you for a minute? I know time is short, and I really think that everybody would love to hear about how we're going to integrate
Join the meeting.
use now. So
Yes,
I know we have to.
We'll have 5 minutes for questions. I will stay on longer if you let the Zoom go longer. I just want to. I'm racing to get through this.
Okay.
Yeah. So just important because this is really changing quite rapidly because this is such a hot topic, and our opinions about medical marijuana and just cannabis in general are really at its most favorable in its history since the 1800s. At the end of 2021, it's just important to recognize that 36 states and DC are now permitting the medical use of cannabis, and half of that, 18, enacted legislation to allow the recreational use of cannabis, and 5 of those 18, so nearly a third, made recreational marijuana permissible just last year in 2021 alone. So momentum is clearly picking up. Obviously, lots of money involved behind cannabis, legal or not, we'll put it at that. In terms of a geriatric population, so it's interesting to note that over half of people over the age of 65 don't even know what CBD stands for, what cannabis products are, like just absolutely zero education about it, according to a Gallup poll just from a few years ago. And for those who are aware about, the existence of marijuana and cannabis and CBD, majority of the time they're using it for, I don't know if people see my mouse arrow thingy, my cursor, that's what they call it. Yes, so those who know about cannabis, mostly using it for pain and anxiety. Now, it's important to understand that because marijuana is still considered a Schedule I drug, there's very limited research that has been conducted on cannabis. But for the data that has been collected, there was enough that a formal report was put out by National Academies in 2017, and that report concluded that there's substantial robust evidence cannabinoids have efficacy in chronic pain, spasticity in MS, and control of nausea. And there's moderate evidence that cannabinoids have efficacy in improving sleep with those who have chronic medical conditions. And there's good but limited evidence that cannabinoids can improve anxiety disorders or help PTSD or promote appetite and weight gain. Other conditions that various studies have looked at, this includes medication refractory migraines, post-traumatic concussion, addiction or opioid reduction, and epilepsy. It is worth noting that while there are several prescription drugs on the market that either have synthetic versions of chemicals that are found in marijuana or chemicals similar to marijuana, but not actually found in the plant, there are only 2 FDA-approved drugs on the market with cannabinoids that are taken directly from the cannabis plant, and one of them is for pediatric epilepsy. That drug is called Epidiolex, and it is a highly purified form of organic CBD. Okay, so how does this help us segue to the relevance of cannabis and PD? Well, there's a reason that PD wasn't listed in any of the previous slides, and that's because currently CBD has an unclear role in treating motor symptoms of PD, but anecdotal stories may convince you otherwise. Most of our information comes from abroad in terms of the studies that we have. And even then it's difficult to ascertain what's helping because there's no standardization for what CBD THC formulations are used, what the milligram dosing is, or just even standardizing what clinical outcomes are being studied. So it's really very difficult to say. And of course, here in the US, the major limitation to performing clinical trials is the fact that medical marijuana is still considered a federally illegal substance, right? So our hands are somewhat tied. And of course, we have formal statements that have been put out by the AAN and by the Parkinson's Foundation, basically saying the same thing. Like, we don't have enough evidence. There's really no consensus here about medical use of PD or of medical use of cannabis in Parkinson's disease. But what is it that we do know at a scientific level? And that's important to know as well. We have a natural cannabinoid system or endocannabinoid system, endo being in short for endogenous or internal. And our natural cannabinoid receptors for the THC and CBD chemical compounds are in our brain and our peripheral nervous system. So the primary ones are CB1 and CB2. CB1 is primarily in the brain and the central nervous system. And CB2 is primarily in the periphery, and that's actually, CB2 is more associated with your immune system. It is known that THC, which is a psychoactive compound, has a higher affinity for these receptors than CBD, but in general, researchers actually don't know how exogenous cannabinoids, like marijuana, trigger their effect on our endocannabinoid system. Okay, so what's clear is that cannabinoids can have both activating and inactivating effects on these receptors. So for an example, animal models have suggested that marijuana's activation of the CB1 receptors, which are in our brain and periphery, They can reduce tremor and dyskinesias, while the CB1 receptor inactivation or reduction in signaling can improve bradykinesia, or the slowness in movements. CB2 receptors play more of a modulating role in non-motor problems like anxiety, depression, or addiction behaviors. And at the cellular level, animal research has also substantiated that there are antioxidant and anti-inflammatory actions by THC and CBD, which can provide neuroprotection against progressive degeneration of dopaminergic neurons. So unfortunately, the promising preclinical studies that were investigating the role of CBD and THC in Parkinson's haven't translated to convincing results in human studies, but there have been a few small clinical trials worth reviewing. In one open label study of CBD where the doctor and the patient were both aware that the patient was receiving treatment and there was no control group, 6 individuals who were being given CBD for their psychosis had their psychotic symptoms decrease. There was another trial, also open label, of CBD, and that was conducted in patients who had REM sleep behavior disorder, and they felt like their sleep improved and their RBD symptoms decreased. There was another double-blinded placebo-controlled trial of 21 patients who were using CBD for 6 weeks, and their motor scores did not objectively improve based on the physician's exam or assessment, but their subjective quality of life scores did improve. And we can go, through this in more detail, but clearly we're running out of time. So the most important thing to know is that after a systematic review of all available international clinical trials with cannabis for Parkinson's, which is more than what this table certainly lists, the American Academy of Neurology found that oral cannabis extract was likely ineffective for dyskinesias and put a formal statement out regarding that as well. So it was specifically for dyskinesias, not other motor symptoms like tremor or bradykinesia. It was specifically pertaining to dyskinesias, which is, a levodopa-induced side effect anyway. It's not because of the PD itself. Okay, so conflicting results aside, just remember 2 things. First, Parkinson's obviously doesn't just impact motor function. There are a lot of non-motor issues like anxiety and pain from dystonia and sleep dysfunction, and sometimes levodopa-induced nausea. And to that end, cannabis can be helpful to address some of those non-motor issues. Secondly, whether marijuana is used medically or recreationally in a Parkinson's patient, you have to be cautious because there are obviously side effects, and that's, on the slide, so you guys can read that later. I always am most wary of the possibility of tipping over into hallucinating, being psychotic or having psychosis if that's not something you're experiencing at baseline. So certainly that's not a pleasant benefit from trying to get, trying to resolve other symptoms just from cannabis. And key takeaways. So research is limited, but still ongoing. And because we can only draw so many conclusions from the available data out there, if you're going to try it, you have to be conservative. Discuss if you think marijuana is appropriate for your particular symptoms with your physician. If you do try it, obviously report back. Treat marijuana or cannabis like an actual prescription medication. And be on the lookout for other clinical trials that might be coming down the pipeline. Questions?
Oh, does everybody want to unmute, or does anybody want to ask a question or write a question in the chat? Thank you, Dr. Clar. That was a lot of information. a lot of information, a lot to digest. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm still a little confused about who you go to, where these dispensaries are, how do they know how to dose you, and can you get specific things? Let's say if I have problems for sleep, am I going to get something specific just for sleep? So
May I ask a question?
yeah.
Sorry, can you hold that thought so I can just answer what Susan's question was quickly? So again, so there's a difference between recreational and medical. If you're going to pursue recreational, that's sort of, you're taking the onus of responsibility on yourself, right? There's nobody really directing that. And on the East Coast, the only place you're going to Again, even though New York and New Jersey legalized recreational marijuana, there's no market for it really right now. So you're not going to find a place with a green cross in New York and New Jersey. You have to drive to Massachusetts. And as far as I know, the latest, because of COVID, safety regulations, you have to like order stuff in advance and then pick it up. And if you don't know what you want, or if you're new to it, usually the individuals, even though they're not doctors, the individuals who actually work at medical marijuana dispensaries or even recreational dispensaries, they're pretty well educated about like what it is that they have and what you should try and what the purposes are for. They did all the trying for you. So that's actually the way to pursue recreational marijuana. But medical marijuana, you have to go through that directory that I listed the links at the beginning of the website, and they will point you to the right, like actual medical marijuana dispensary.
Okay, thank you. All right, Shirley, did you want to ask your question?
No, do regular painkillers like Advil and Tylenol, they have no effect on the pain that comes from PD?
I mean, they absolutely can. They absolutely can. And everything in PD is ultimately going to be trial and error. So, you know, if you're not taking traditional things like Tylenol or NSAIDs like Advil, you absolutely should be starting with that. It's, you know, tried and tested and proven to be successful for many issues. But at the end of the day, you know, as Jen had listed in her slide, you know, we don't say PD. You can't say PD causes my pain. That's just too broad of a description, right? There are different kinds of pain, and it's important to understand what kind of pain. So if it's a nerve pain, if it's a musculoskeletal pain, if it's a central pain. So it's always worth trying, you know, safe drugs like Tylenol and Advil in reasonable doses, of course. So somebody asked, can CBD replace levodopa therapy in the chat? No. I can elaborate further, but simply put, levodopa is still necessary. I mean, as long as you can tolerate it. Obviously, there are Parkinsonian patients that do not tolerate levodopa because their side effects outweigh the benefits, or they may not have any response whatsoever. But levodopa is still considered the gold standard for the treatment of any Parkinsonian condition. It is meant to replace a missing chemical that's no longer being produced in the brain, and CBD is absolutely not a substitute for levodopa.
Dr. Clar, can you discuss this? Is there a big difference between inhaling and taking it orally?
Sure, absolutely. And that's the same case for levodopa. I mean, levodopa comes actually now in an inhaled form like Inbrija, and there's an oral, you know, well, oral was always standard, but yes, CBD, it comes in gummies, it comes as droppers, it comes as vape pens, it has many different forms, and that's definitely going to have an impact on how quickly it hits your body, how quickly you sort of get that high, as opposed to how long it takes to sort of kick in. It's almost, you know, similar to how we discuss. Sorry, my lights went out, so I'm just like trying to, it's motion sensitive. There you go. So it's similar to how we think about levodopa. So if you inhale marijuana or inhale some form of cannabis, it's probably going to get absorbed into your bloodstream more quickly, and you're going to get a high within a minute. But if you're taking an oil dropper under your tongue, that's going to take a little bit longer. If you ingest a gummy, it has to go through your gut, and you know the pharmacokinetics of something being processed through your gut takes a lot longer, so that can take hours to actually kick in.
Excuse me, are there any painkillers that are contraindicated with Parkinson's?
Yeah, opioids, bad.
Okay, other than that, acetaminophen and
as long as you don't overdose, that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Somebody said even if you get medical marijuana, you're still on your own. I mean, that's a very depressing statement. I think you can say that about everything. Even if you get carbidopa levodopa, you're still on your own. I'd like to spin that in a more positive light, which is regardless of what treatment modalities you use, you're not on your own, but you have to figure out for yourself what works for your body. Because, you know, I come as close as one could possibly get to understanding Parkinson's, but I don't have Parkinson's. I'm not in my patient's shoes, but I'm about as close as anybody can get, because this is all I do all day, every day. And I don't ever want to think that my patients, Jesus, and it's not even 5 o'clock, my patients, I never want my patients to think that they are on their own. Parkinson's management is absolutely a collaborative effort, whether you're trying marijuana or new prescription drugs that are FDA approved.
Actually, Jen is actually working on that topic. Maybe you want to say something about that idea. It could join in.
I mean, ultimately, I think for people to, my sense is always, I defer to whatever your doctor says in regards to medicine, but exercise is, you're only on your own as much as what you're willing to sort of seek out. And I think places like communities like PWP that kind of give you these sort of resources, sort of put it in your hands, and then you have to run with it, which sometimes can be very overwhelming. Just what I hear.
You're going to have that coaching program, so we'll talk about that another time.
Right. So yeah, that's what I was going to say. I am a co-owner in Inspired PD, which is a physical activity coaching program. Essentially what it is myself and my partner are 2 physical therapists that are providing not only a virtual platform for which we can sort of help you figure out the best exercise platform and modalities for you, but also sort of be a sounding board and be the resource for you to,
Your best.
send you to, okay, it's time to.
I just want to make sure if anybody else has any other last minute questions, because I have to run to see several patients waiting. So I just want to make sure that
I want to thank you, Dr. Clar, really. It was
absolutely.
very informative. There's a lot to learn about this, and we appreciate all your time.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to thank Dr. Clar, and I'm going to thank Jennifer Reid. We'll see both of them again soon. I want to thank everybody for coming. We have a great webinar February 8th with Dr. Reid, who wrote the book Ending Parkinson's Disease. You're going to want to hear him. And we have a new radio show coming up starting February 15th, and I'll tell you all about it. I'll send you some emails on that. So thanks for joining us, everybody. We appreciate your time. Keep exercising. I love what you're all doing.
Susan,
Send us any questions you may have. We'd love to hear from you. Your thoughts about the program, your thoughts about what you want to learn more. We're making these programs for you. So that's how we get these together. Use music. It's got rhythm and it keeps you moving, right? Or are you playing your guitar? Lori, are you playing your guitar? Why not? You love that. I'm glad you brought your lunch.
You're sitting at your feet.
It's not missing an apple. Okay, good. All right, enjoy your day, everybody. Any other questions, you can send them to me.